Hello, I'm Henry, and I watched a movie. I watched The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, and I would like to talk about it, please. Is there a difference between side characters and minor characters, or a protagonist and a main character? I think yes. I think there's a hierarchy. A pyramid, if you will. I think it goes protagonist, the person at the very centre of the story, main characters, the people most closely associated with the protagonist's journey or important to the mechanics of the story, side characters who support the main character and protagonist, maybe having one or two major moments of their own, but not really outright affecting things in a grander scale, and minor characters, background people, set dressing more than anything. They're there, they say a few things. That's about it. Are those sort of small explanations enough though? I mean, how do you really know which character goes into which level? Well, it's one of those when you know kind of things. You could look at concrete factors like screen time or number of lines in the script or big character decisions made, but that stuff sort of blends together in your head with those little descriptions I gave a moment ago, and you get a vibe. You just kind of know which character fits into which level. Let's have a quick example here to show you what I'm talking about. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. One protagonist, little Harry Potter. I'd say 3 main characters, Ron, Hermione and Hagrid. Some side characters, the Dursleys, Snape, Dumbledore, Quirrell, Malfoy, Neville, maybe? And then sort of just everyone else with a name. Your McGonagalls, your Flitwicks, your Woods. Obviously not taking into account background extras. And also obviously this would be different if we're looking at a different movie in the series or the series as a whole. But I'd say this is a good structure for the first film. And this is what I mean. Most stories can have their characters classified like this. And one thing that should be consistent is the size of the levels of the pyramid. There should be progressively more characters the further you go down. The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, sees that rule I just made up and laughs in its face. It starts off alright. We've got our one protagonist, the titular Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, around whom the whole story hinges. Then, as main characters go, we've got Thorin Oakenshield, Gandalf, and Smaug. 2 pivotal good guy characters that make a lot of things happen in the plot. Whether you think Gandalf's side quest should have happened at all in the plot is not the question here. And the main villain, whose name is also in the title. Whether you think he should have died in this movie and not the first 10 minutes of the second movie is not the question here. And then we get a parade of so many side characters that it becomes parody. And these are genuine side characters. These aren't slightly less important main characters that you could describe Snape as in our Harry Potter example from earlier. And these aren't slightly more important minor characters like you might describe Neville as from our Harry Potter example earlier. These are full-blown side characters. They've got lines, they do quite a lot of bits, but they drop in and out. Or they're absent completely until they show up, at which point they are impossible to get rid of. They are Balin, Dwalin, Killy, Legolas, Tauriel, Thranduil, Beorn, Radagast, Bard, Grubby Stephen Fry, truly one of the worst fictional characters ever, Azog, Bolg, and the Necromancer. That is 14 side characters. That is far too much. And somehow outnumber the minor characters despite there being 9 other dwarves in that category. This is no longer a pyramid, it's some kind of unholy trapezoid, and just as it throws off the balance of this shape, it also throws off the balance of the whole movie. Each one of them sucks up dialogue and screen time and plot space until there is no room for a properly structured story, and it just becomes layers and layers of stuff. This is partly due to the nature of an adventure story. You're traveling along, you meet people along the way. But the people you tend to meet in adventure stories will be minor at best. You meet them and then they're barely seen again. And if any of them do become more important, being upgraded to side characters, far more care is taken with how they are used. Their presence is not constant but restrained. Their dialogue and screen time is not overwhelming but deliberate. Look at The Fellowship of the Ring, the first movie in the series that this series is so desperately trying to emulate. Theatrical release, extended editions kind of throw spanner into all of this because everyone's a main character when your movie's 4 hours long. Protagonist, Frodo. Main characters, Sam, Aragorn, Gandalf. Side characters, Bilbo, Elrond, Arwen, Saruman, Galadriel, and the rest of the Fellowship minus Legolas. Minor characters, Legs, Barleyman Butterbur, the Nazgul, Sauron, the Balrog, Lurtz, Celeborn, Haldir. This is what a character pyramid should look like. And yeah, while some of these are a bit fluid, you could move Legolas up, you could move Galadriel and Gimli down. There are still 9 whole side characters, which is only 5 less than the D of S. They are handled so much better though, because they do things that matter. They say things that matter. Elrond heals Frodo and holds the council that forms the Fellowship. Boromir goes mental, then has a hero's death and is Sean Bean. Bilbo starts the film with the ring. What does Balin actually do? He's like the designated dwarf that talks, so as not to spread the dialogue around the others and make things confusing and all over the place. Kili and Tauriel start what will become one of cinema's worst romances of the last 20 years. And then there's Alfred Lickspittle. Words cannot describe how much I hate this repugnant character. He is number 1, I think, in my top 5 worst fictional characters of all time. Tangent! Henry's top 5 worst fictional characters of all time. Coming in at number 5, we've got Cameron from the Pokemon Black and White series, introducing an insufferably annoying character at the end of an insufferably annoying series. Number 4, Tom Cruise's assistant guy in the Mummy reboot, the worst kind of modern Hollywood comic relief. Did that just happen? Not funny in any way. Number 3, Scott Pilgrim from the books specifically, a 20-something-year-old with the maturity of a 12-year-old, a cheater and possibly some kind of sex pest. Number 2, Nynaeve from The Eye of the World, but only The Eye of the World. She's a lot better going forward, but in the first book she is unbearably and needlessly antagonistic to every other living creature that enters her radius. And number 1, Big Al here, a foul leech of screen time, a character that, once our heroes enter Lake Town, you cannot escape. He is everywhere, polluting every scene with weak and woefully unfunny comic relief and utterly toothless threat and antagonism. He is nothing and everything at the same time, and it is a crime that he exists at all. Oh, and just missing out the top 5 were Tristram Thorne from the Stardust book and Claudia Delina from The Last Don. While Alfred is the worst offender of these 1,000 side characters, the damage he does to the quality and pacing of the movie can be extrapolated across the others, because none of these people are important in any way and barely push the plot forward in any capacity. Things grind to a halt whenever they show up, whenever they speak. With the exception of Bard getting the party into Lake Town and possibly Beorn giving the party a place to sleep for a night, none of these people do anything positive or impactful. Name one thing Radagast does except allow Sylvester McCoy to gurn at the camera. Why is Dwalin positioned as this second-in-command fighter-style dwarf? Why is he the first dwarf introduced in the first movie when he just blends into the background of most scenes, or just has a needlessly aggressive one line here and there? Now, Azog and Bolg are somewhat exceptions to this, being antagonists. It's their job to hinder things, but even then they don't do it well. They just show up over and over like faceless hurdles just to overcome and then move on. It's just character soup, a whirlpool of people contributing nothing to the overall direction of the story. Seriously, nothing. It makes watching this movie feel like a slog, like you're trekking through a swamp, like you're forcing yourself on. Every minute that the Master of Lake Town is on screen is harder than the minute that came before. Every orc that Legolas cuts down in an unwatchable smudge of CGI nonsense makes you forget one of his awesome moments in the series previous. And just when you think you've escaped one glacially paced stretch of nothingness induced by a gaggle of side characters, another one raises its head. It's endless. It feels like it's closing in around you. And it really is the root cause of this movie's overall lack of quality. Yes, the story is structured in a really weird way with straight up no ending. Yes, a lot of the dialogue is modern Hollywood at its laziest. Yes, the visual effects are unforgivable in places, but it's the sheer overwhelming amount of prominent characters that hits you hardest in the face. And when you realise the vast majority of those prominent characters have no footprint in the plot whatsoever, your brain sort of disengages. You go into neutral when you realise nothing matters and it all just washes over you. Well, how do we fix this then? This movie is in an irreparable state, but if we were to have a go at fixing it, where would we start? That's obvious, isn't it? Get rid of all these side characters. Now, I should bring up the elephant in the room here now. The Hobbit book. It is amazing, and the fact that it's from 1937 blows my mind. So the movies should have just done that. They should have just made one kids movie as a loyal adaptation. But they didn't. They got greedy. So we're not going to factor the book in here. When we're getting rid of these characters, we're not just going to default to what the book did. We're thinking about the quality and pacing of this movie, and to a lesser extent the trilogy as a whole, but mainly this movie. So, of the 14 side characters I mentioned earlier, I think you could straight up slice out 7 of them. Legolas, Beorn, Radagast, the Master of Lake Town, Alfred, Bolg, and the Necromancer. Wholesale. Just completely get rid of them. None of them do anything. The Necromancer is Sauron, I hear you say, and he's important. Well, what if he wasn't, and Beorn gives our party safe harbour? We need him. Well, what if they weren't getting chased at that point? There are far more questions than answers with Beorn anyway, and that whole 2x2 bit with Jimmy Nesbitt hamming it up as much as possible is a lot better in the book. Then we demote Dwalin and Killy to minor characters, keep the majority of the dwarves in the background. Just keep them as what they're supposed to be. A funny gag about there being a lot of them with similar sounding names. So that leaves us with 5 side characters that you can focus on properly. Balin, make him the proper second in command of the dwarves. Give him more dialogue and give him more backstory. He's been alive for a lot of the battles that happened prior to the beginning of the story. Tauriel, you need some female representation here, you just do. Just don't give her a forced romanced love triangle thing. I mean, honestly, can't she just be a cool elf lady that does cool elf things? Kind of like what Legolas was in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, just with effects similar to that than what we get here, please. Thranduil, a cool sort of grey character. He's got his own motives. He's not good, he's not bad. He's just out to protect his own. A potentially deep roadblock our characters could face. Plus he does that cool face thing, which honestly might be the best moment in the entire trilogy. Bard, he kills the dragon. Introduce him earlier, get rid of his Aragorn-light inner turmoil, get rid of all of the Lake Town awfulness, and have him kill the dragon in the climax of this movie. Azog, a decent secondary villain. Smaug is the big bad. Azog can provide tension and threat when we aren't dealing with the dragon. And then again, after we've finished dealing with the dragon. There we go, we fixed it. You're welcome, Pete. I said it a second ago, and it's a pretty ice cold take at this point, but they really should have just made a single movie adaptation of The Hobbit. One 90-minute to 2-hour fun adventure, instead of 3 grim, direct prequels to The Lord of the Rings. But because they didn't do that, and they did the second thing, they had a problem. How do you flesh out something that had nothing really to flesh out? Side characters. They filled the movies, this second one in particular, with side characters until it was fit to burst. Inflate minor characters, drag characters in from an appendix somewhere, or just invent them entirely. And I could say it definitely worked when it came to fleshing things out. These movies are long, and there are 3 of them. They got their trilogy that they wanted, but it was fleshed out with blubber, not muscle. There is no meat on these bones. It is a shambling sack of grey side character mush, just sloshing about, ready to pop at any moment. Hello, thanks a lot for getting to the end of the video. Like and subscribe. Next week we have our first in the new series of the videos between the bigger videos. It's more along the lines of the Scott Pilgrim series than to the Flanimal series, but I think it'll be alright. So stay tuned for that.